All right, I think I got time for one more one. This next one is original. It is called The Hollow Woman. I want to go to the beach, she cried, though no one was listening to her. But the need was real, more insistent and more consistent than any other sensation she could identify. Her life was a tempest, tearing all that was her into tattered rags until there was left only meaningless flesh. But at the heart of that tempest lay that image, that sensation of the beach which never left her. She needed so desperately to become hollow, to pour herself into the brown sand and feel the salty breeze blow through her and the sound of water echoing through her skull. She watched the waves, and churning out of them, not materializing like some Hollywood special effect, was the unicorn, its skin rippling like water. She looked across the lapping waves into his brown eyes and tried to pour herself into them, but there was a barrier there, and she heard him say, "You are the barrier. You can no longer return to the beach. You cannot fit through the door anymore. You have grown too tall." And she saw her legs and arms stretching away from hers until they weren't hers anymore. Her body became a tangle of hideous angles, and she saw the ape-like faces of boys leering at her wherever she went. The eyes undressing her made her feel naked, and she wanted to cry, but she had forgotten how to. At the beach she couldn't go to anymore, no matter how badly she needed to, and she did. He couldn't understand, the boy who said she belonged to him, who mocked her because he was afraid of the burning need inside of her. But the burning need inside of him frightened her more when he wouldn't listen to the no in her eyes, but she let him kiss her because she was afraid it was all she had to give. She tried telling him about the unicorn only once, and when she inquired about the silence of his response, he responded, "I don't know how to laugh at a unicorn," and lapsed into a mood which frightened her. She was too tall to fit through the door anymore, and her body was a tangle of hideous angles. She was surrounded by ungainly birds who chattered and prattled about empty things, lost in their own discordant music. They needed so much from her and took it, then hated her for reasons they didn't understand and made her feel ugly inside. I could lose this thing inside of me, this ugliness and the pulse and rhythm of water reverberating through my hollowness. But she was too tall to fit through the door anymore, and her body was a tangle of hideous angles. Yet perhaps someday she could die, could feel the blood drain from her hideous veins, and then she truly would be hollow. And when she had shrunk and shriveled to the size of a raisin, she could fit through the door once more and would find the beach unchanged within her, could lay herself down upon the brown sand and pour herself into it, feel the salty breeze blowing through her hollow body and hear the sound of water reverberating through her skull. Then the unicorn would come pulsing out of the waves, not materializing like some Hollywood special effect, and she would pour herself into his brown eyes, take hold of his white mane with her meaningless fingers, and be pulled beneath the waves for 1,000 forevers. Thanks.
Keep it going for Philip Andrew Benelo! Hooray! Who's having a good time this morning? Isn't it nice? Oh, you're so sad sounding. I get it. It's been a long year. So you could see Philip in a bunch of stuff during CONvergence, but especially he is hosting the Not So Silent Planet tomorrow right here. That's the thing, tomorrow morning, so come check that out if you want. Oh my gosh, I know you're just going to be so excited for this next performer. I know her really well. Put your hands together for your very own host, Allison Broren! So I think one of the interesting things about being asked to perform folk tales and fairy tales and myths and things like that, I think Philip did a great job of saying, like, here's an adaptation of one and here's like an original one. And for me, I love using writing like this to take elements of like what's happening in my life and sort of like putting a spin on them that lets me be able to deal with it, right? We might all be doing a lot of writing like that after the past year and a half pretty soon. So this is one of those stories that I have from a long time ago. If you see me later, I'm willing to tell you where the truth lies in here. Hold on. I want you to talk to my best friend. His name's Astro. Astro? I asked him. Yes, he's my wiener dog and he has white feet. Oh my, I was taken a little off guard as this was my first time talking to Jonathan on the phone. Don't worry though, he enjoys talking about a wide range of topics. You'll love him. Hold on. Astro, come here, boy. I have someone I want you to say hello to. And there was a pause, and I hear Jonathan like shuffling around, and then I hear him start to woof a little before he clears his voice and starts talking as low as he could. Ruff, ruff, I'm Astro. Oh, hi, Astro. Jonathan was very glad that he has a friend like you now. Any friend of Jonathan's is a good friend of mine. It's been a while since he's had another good friend. Well, thank you, Astro. You're a good friend of mine now, too. And with that, Jonathan put the phone down and barked a little more, but I can hear him sniffling as his own shaky voice took over again. Thank you. Can I call you again tomorrow? Of course, I told him. You see, Jonathan is this little 8-year-old boy who lives halfway across the country from me. So what's a girl like me in my 20s doing talking to him on the phone? Well, we met online. I mean, it's not anything weird, though. His mom was a member of an online support group that I belonged to. Jonathan had recently been diagnosed with the same thing that had almost killed me 5 years ago, Wegener's granulomatosis, an autoimmune disease. She was just besides herself in her postings. Jonathan had been more or less bedridden for months now. And the parents were too afraid to let their kids to visit him, and he was lonely. She was terrified, and she didn't know if they were figments of his imagination or drug-induced hallucinations that he was having because of his treatment, because, he saw things like an imaginary dog. I tried my best to tell her what I had gone through, so maybe she could understand the side effects and the pain of it all a little bit better. Jonathan was having his ups and his downs like we all did during our initial crisis. Eventually, I asked her if it would be okay if I called him and got to tell him how I was doing these days and that someday his life could be normal again, maybe too. And after my first conversation with him and Astro, Jonathan would call me every night before he went to bed. Even though I knew he was spending his days in bed watching TV and resting, he would tell me about all of his adventures with Astro. Or sometimes Astro would tell me all about his amazing adventures with Jonathan. How Jonathan was the best ball thrower, how they went running in the woods, how Jonathan was so fast that he could beat him, how Jonathan was the best friend a little wiener dog with white feet could ever want. One of the things that Jonathan liked hearing about was how normal my life was again. I would tell him about my exciting weekends out with friends, about the dates I went on, about how many people in my life didn't even know I was sick when they first met me. And even though I was still taking a weekly dose of chemotherapy, they didn't know anything was wrong. And one night, I was super excited to tell Jonathan that I was going to be taking a trip to Ireland. I was finally healthy enough to do something like this for myself again. I might not be able to talk to you every day while I'm gone, Jonathan, but I'll call as often as I can. There was a long silence on the other line when Jonathan replied, "Could you do me a favor when you're gone? Could you find me a leprechaun? I feel like I can use some extra luck these days." Yeah, I can try. Sometimes those leprechauns can be tricky, though. I hear that they will grant wishes, but not always in the way that you thought they would. I just thought that maybe he can help me get better. Jonathan had an unusual moment of clarity. Then he said, I'm tired now. Would you mind reading me a story over the phone as I fall asleep? And the next day when I talked to him, Jonathan had spent the day researching Ireland with his mother. He had looked at maps, he had read all about things to do, all of it. He was so excited. I wish I can go with you. Oh, I know we would have a great time together for sure. I know, Jonathan said. You could take Astro. I know he would love to go, and then my two best friends can be having a good time together. Oh, Jonathan, are you sure? I mean, you want me to take Astro with me? Yeah, he deserves a good time. And he can help you find the leprechaun for me in time. In time for what, Jonathan? Just, in time for us to all have some fun together. I'm tired. Astro wants to make some travel plans with you. I'll put him on the phone and say goodnight. So it was settled. Astro would be meeting me at the airport. I was going to pack for him and bring with me a leash and his food. And so the day I was leaving, Jonathan's mom called me and she said, "Oh, I just want to thank you so much for talking to Jonathan every day. I mean, I know he's not a real normal boy, but I appreciate you playing around with him. I'll be honest, though, it'll be nice to have a bit of time without him carrying around about his silly imaginary dog." I said to her, "Oh my gosh, I'll take such good care of Astro. I'll email Jonathan pictures every day and call when I can." So when I landed in Dublin, the bus driver looked at me like I was nuts when I asked him to take a picture of me holding a leash with an empty seat next to me. "Take it a little higher, though," I said, "so it looks like the dog got cut out of the picture." And later on, I emailed the photo to Jonathan with a message that said, "Astro and I riding into town. Sorry he's hard to see, but the bus driver wasn't a very good photographer." I did the same thing as I took Astro around to the pubs in Dublin, the Jameson Distillery. There was pictures of Astro's leash on a stool next to me. There was one of him hiding behind the statue of Oscar Wilde, and the list just went on and on. So a few days into my trip, I was able to call Jonathan. And when I answered, I said, rough, Jonathan, I'm having a great time and I love my new leash." And Jonathan instantly yelled back at me, "That's not Astro. What do you think you're doing?" I didn't know how to respond as he kept on going, "What did you do to Astro? He's not in any of those pictures that you're sending. Did you let him loose? Oh my God, you killed him. Astro's dead, isn't he? I just know it." And he just starts sobbing into the phone and hangs up. And I called back, and nobody picked up. And I called again and again. And finally, Jonathan's mom picked up, and I could hear him sobbing in the background. "Oh my God," she told me, "why did you have to pretend Astro was real? This is not good for him at all. Ever since you left, all he does is cry all day and says he hopes he can wish on the leprechaun you bring him, and that he can use the leprechaun wish to bring Astro back to life because you killed Astro, and he's been through so much already, and he doesn't need this fantasy upsetting him too. Just don't call back here again." And then she slammed the phone down on me too. I was distraught. I took off for a 4-day rail tour through the country. I held the leash with me the whole time, thinking about what I had done. I mean, was it so bad to pretend? It made us both feel better, so wasn't it all right? I thought about how I felt closer to Astro than I actually did to many of my friends back home, and how if Jonathan needed him as his friend until he was well enough to get back to his old friends, well, I mean, wasn't that okay too? Then I thought about how I had promised Jonathan that I'd bring him a leprechaun home for good luck. God, I knew I had made a mistake there. I mean, I thought he knew they weren't real and that I could bring them a stuffed one or something, but that's not what he wanted or what he believed he needed. I felt terrible. And on my last day, I was riding around in an open-top bus one last time looking at the city. It had been days since the meltdown with Jonathan. I just wanted to go home. I didn't exactly know how things were going to shake out with Jonathan and his family, but I knew I had to call again and try to work it out. I was in the middle of figuring out my plan when all of a sudden a big gust of wind came, and I grabbed my hat so it wouldn't blow off my head, but in doing that I let go of the leash for a second and got caught by the wind, and it flew over the railing of the bus and onto the street. "No!" I screamed as I ran down the stairs to the driver. "Astro!" I shouted right as I heard car brakes squeal and another car crashing into it. "Stop the bus!" I was shouting. "Astro! Astro!" And the bus driver pulled over as I hopped off the bus, and the driver of the car was peering under under the car saying, oh no, he came out of nowhere. And Astro's leash was under one of the tires. Oh no, ma'am, I said as I tried to pull myself together. I grabbed her by the shoulder to pull her out from under the car. There's no dog. It's just a leash. And the woman stood there and looked at me like I had totally lost my mind. Oh my God, is he yours? He came out of nowhere. I don't even know what happened. She said, no, it's just a leash, I tried saying through my crying. And then she grabbed me and she pulled me down. And there, under the car, was a small wiener dog whimpering. Astro? I didn't even know what was going on, but the little guy responded. I swear to God, he looked up at me, responding to his names before he closed his eyes for the last time ever. He had 4 white feet. The woman was looking at me saying, oh my God, was he yours? How was he even wearing that leash? He doesn't have a collar on. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. And she kept talking as I wandered away, just in complete shock. I don't remember much about the plane ride home, only that something was very wrong in the universe. The second I got home, I started calling Jonathan. Nobody answered. I just kept calling and calling and calling until it was the middle of the night, and finally his mom picked up and she was crying. He's gone. What? Jonathan. He didn't make it. What do you mean? He had to go to the hospital the night he talked to you. His lungs and his kidneys were shutting down, and he kept saying he was holding on until you brought him his leprechaun who can make everything better. But then this afternoon, he started to say that he saw Astro and that Astro was waiting for him, and then he wanted to go play with him, and I begged him, I begged him to hold on, but he said he didn't need to anymore because one of his best friends was waiting for him, and he was happy to go to a place where he could just play, and he's gone. Oh my God, he's gone. He was real. You have to know that, I told her. What? Astro. I began as I told her the whole story. And to this day, I still can't believe that Jonathan is gone, but I do know that Astro was real and that leprechaun wishes can come true, even if it's in the way that you least expect them. Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone. Oh, my first performance in so long. How cathartic. Yay. Okay, so we have another amazing storyteller, but before he comes up here, I just want to say I'll be hosting the Poetry Slam later on tonight. It is open to anyone that wants to bring their lovey, geeky, nerdy poems about whatever they want. Sign up is out there if you wish to compete, or come back and watch. It'll be a lot of fun. Also, if telling stories is something you might be interested in, I'm one of the co-founders of Strike Theater in Northeast Minneapolis, outside of CONvergence. Please come share stories with us, watch stories with us, take classes, do all the things. You can find us at strike.theater. We're in like a post.com universe, so find us online, and I'd love to have you at shows throughout the rest of the year. All right, we are going to have our next storyteller come on up here and make a bunch of noise as we welcome to the stage Pat Harrigan.
Thanks, Allison. My friend, Professor Paul Chu of the Department of Chinese Language and Literature at Tsinghua University and a member of its Research and Conservation Center for Excavated Texts, has recently come across a curious document while cataloging a private collection. This document, which Professor Chu assures me has been fully authenticated, is from the hand of the renowned scholar Pu Songling, author of the enormously famous and influential Laozhai Zhiyi, a collection of 500-some weird tales first published posthumously in 1740, generally known in English as Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio. The stories in this book, as told, are the product of one of the great geniuses of classical Chinese prose, but it is generally understood that many of them were originally told to Master Pu by his friends and acquaintances, and in his text he often refers to himself by the mildly humorous, self-effacing title of Chronicler of the Strange. The work of a lifetime of constant compilation, Pu's book has no agreed-upon definitive version, and so it was exciting but not altogether astonishing when Professor Chu ran across this hitherto unknown story. I recount it here in English for the first time, paraphrased from Professor Chu's translation in advance of his forthcoming article in the Journal of Dubious Anthropology. Pu Songling tells the story of a Shandong magistrate named Wang, resident in Zibo, Master Pu's hometown, the year after Chie Qian's failed rebellion. This locates us in the year 1648, when Pu Songling would have been around 8 years old. One night, shortly before dark, one of the magistrate's servants entered the studio to inform him that there were travelers on the road, and Magistrate Wang stepped outside to see for himself. Sure enough, in the far distance, silhouetted against the horizon, he saw 3 large sedan chairs approaching, borne by large, well-muscled servants. As the magistrate lived in a somewhat secluded area, there was no doubt that these visitors were coming to his yamen, so he immediately commanded his servants to make his household ready to receive them. After some time, the visitors arrived, and the magistrate welcomed them into his residence. They were 3 in number, a middle-aged gentleman, a young woman, and a small boy. They wore curious clothes, which fit tightly around their bodies in places and flowed loosely in others, in a manner that the magistrate had never seen before, and the colors of the fabrics were extremely faded. The visitors' skins were also very pale, and their hair a very light brown. The magistrate's young son, peeking at them from behind a door, thought they were perhaps Japanese. Once inside, the magistrate graciously seated them at his table and offered them tea, while his wife, concubines, and servants waited attentively in the next room. His visitors sat stiffly on his cushions and said very little except the simplest pleasantries. The magistrate, thinking to put them at ease, inquired where they were bound and if their journey had been pleasant. Yes, they said in a strange accent, their journey had been very pleasant indeed. They had met many hospitable people in this place. As for their destination, it was far away, and the magistrate did not recognize the name. The man did most of the talking, although the woman would occasionally interject a sentence or two, which the magistrate found somewhat disconcerting. When Magistrate Wang would turn the talk to present events or to the well-known material of Chinese history and literature, his guests had nothing to contribute, although they ventured a few remarks on the future of the kingdom. Horror and evanishment, said the man. I should mention that Professor Chu has not elaborated to me why he chose this unusual English word, or what it might connote in the Mandarin original. 10 billion spread from the Yellow River to the moon, said the woman. Magistrate Wang guessed that they were aficionados of the Book of Changes and nodded along in sympathetic understanding. During this, the boy did not speak at all, and everyone's tea sat untouched. A somewhat uncomfortable silence fell, so the magistrate thought it was finally perhaps time for dinner. He commanded his servants to bring forth the food to the table. Even though he had not been expecting guests, Magistrate Wang rarely received anyone, he ran a very efficient household, and his servants had been able to prepare a good meal on short notice. They brought out an impressive platter of tea-smoked duck in the Sichuan style, and slices of roasted pork with vinegar, as well as braised chicken and bowls of small dried fish and chilies, grasshoppers, sweet potatoes, and other such foods. His guests sat graciously on their cushions but made no move to eat. Thinking that they might be unfamiliar with Shandong fare, he moved to reassure them, bowed, picked up a piece of steamed bread with his chopsticks, and ate it. Now his guests seemed to understand. The middle-aged man groped a pair of chopsticks from the table and used them to pluck a button from the magistrate's robe, which he swallowed before consuming the chopsticks as well in a few bites. The woman followed suit, dumping a bowl of soup onto the floor and stuffing the bowl into her surprisingly wide mouth. The boy, who had been sitting politely before, became animated, eating one spoon after another in quick succession and following it with one of the magistrate's embroidered placemats, after which he climbed upon the table, trampling the duck, to untie and eat the magistrate's hat. Astonished, Magistrate Wang ordered his servants to bring more bowls and chopsticks and the next course, but by this time most of the servants had fled in fear, and those who remained were being gradually stripped of their clothes by the guests, who gobbled them down before moving on to suck the paper from the walls and folding screens, and then chew away at the dining table itself. In this fashion, they proceeded through the magistrate's house, feeding themselves on all his possessions, but leaving all the food and all the magistrate's family and servants and all his pet canaries, which flew away after the loss of their cages, uningurgitated. When the guests had eaten everything of value in the home, they bowed graciously to the magistrate and his nude family and household, and returned to their transports, where their strange litter-bearers, who had not mingled with the magistrate's household at all, and whose heads, it was revealed in the dark, were only pale, flickering yellow flames, like those of a guttering lamp, assisted them up and carried them back down the road, where they were quickly lost to sight in the blackness of the evening. Everyone in the household later fell ill, but they soon recovered. Although he had been literally eaten out of house and home, Magistrate Wang soon prospered again, and in fact became a much richer man than he had ever been before. He died at a relatively young age, however. Large growths began to appear on his body, and though they were not painful, he gradually lost his wits and his appetite, and he wasted away. The funeral was a memorable and well-attended affair in Zibo, and was talked about for many years afterward, because the magistrate was well known as a generous and honorable man. Pu Song Ling writes that he heard this story directly from the magistrate's son, who witnessed the events himself and swears to the truth of them. This son grew up to be a scholar of the second highest rank and an advisor to the court, although he was never blessed with children, and when he died, all his possessions passed to a distant cousin. The chronicler of the strange appends an enigmatic note to the end of this tale. Such provides the rich man, so we see, and such return the hungry. My friend Professor Chu has not yet coordinated this remark with Pu Song Ling's other known writings, and tells me that he can make no comment as to its meaning at this time. I look forward, as I hope you do, to his further explication. Thank you. I have one more thing to read before we're done for today's program. Good morning. I have been asked to provide a conclusion to today's performance. It gives me great displeasure to have to do so, but by the terms of the highly restrictive contract negotiated by my personal assistant Cameron, whose holiday bonus will be smaller than usual this year, I am compelled. By my presence and through sheer force of will, I hope to recapture some dignity for these proceedings. After all, I am a recognized authority in several disparate fields, such as European folklore, early Byzantine history, and speculative pornography, have been published in innumerable international academic journals, and am in much demand as a keynote speaker, professional wrestling MC, and expert courtroom witness. Like Taylor Swift, I have a big reputation. I mean to provide a measure of historical context to this morning's entertainment, if that's the right word, and as we all no doubt have better things to do this afternoon, I shall be brief. Thanks in large part to 80 years of Walt Disney adaptations, most of us are familiar with quite a few Middle European folktales, Pinocchio, Snow White, and so on. These are, of course, only a small fraction of the stories that have come down to us. The Brothers Grimm included 86 tales in their first collection of 1812, and the final 1857 edition had grown to 210. But even that book was far from comprehensive. How could any book ever be? Folk tales by their nature seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, springing to popular attention seemingly overnight, but proving upon examination to have been widely known for a long time. Their origins seem to recede forever, further and further into the past. In the words of the French philosopher Jacques Derrida, they are always already there. It is one of this type I wish to discuss tonight. Known in English as the Goblin Games, in German Koboldspiele, some commentators have speculated that this tale formed part of the inspiration for Christina Rossetti's famous 1862 poem Goblin Market, but I think this is unlikely. The story was apparently unknown to the Brothers Grimm, being absent from all editions of their collected fairy tales, nor does it appear in Bernhard Bader or any other folklorist until Ingo Schäfer's 1932 collection Bayerische Erzählungen. So it seems unlikely that Miss Rossetti was familiar with it, and in any case, the plot details are very different, and the story presents a more conventionally heterosexual environment compared to her rather more sapphic one. Still, certain passages do bear an undoubtable resemblance, so I suppose it is at least possible. The story, set in the Black Forest region of southwest Germany and dating back at least as far as the 16th century, if Schäfer is to be believed, goes something like this. A young woman alone in the forest one day comes across a group of goblins playing by a river. They challenge her to a variety of games, foot and swimming races, archery contests, etc. The young woman, evidently familiar with the usual course of events in stories such as these, declines, not wishing to be tricked into wagering her youth and beauty or her immortal soul or something. But eventually the goblins convince her, with assurances that anything she loses will be trivial, barely anything at all, since it is all in fun. And such did it appear, as over the next days and weeks she competes with one goblin or another in climbing games and dancing games and dice and card games and feats of skill such as juggling and speed embroidery. Sometimes she would win and be awarded with a fresh yellow dandelion or an interesting rock. And sometimes she lost and had to write her name 5 times in the sand, or sacrifice a lock of her hair, or let the goblins tickle her feet for half a minute. She competed with distinction in the pie-eating contest, ultimately coming in a close second to a fat, pig-snouted goblin, and the list of various pies consumed in the contest is, I'll admit, pretty reminiscent of the famous list of fruits sold by the goblin merchantmen in Christina Rossetti's poem. You'll recall her marvelous lines, apples and quinces, lemons and oranges, plump unpecked cherries, melons and raspberries, bloom-down-cheeked peaches, swart-headed mulberries, wild freeborn cranberries, crab apples, dewberries, pineapples, blackberries, apricots, strawberries, all ripe together in summer weather. The pig-faced goblin won a goblin pie recipe book for his victory. The young woman received, as you might expect, a pie in the face. Her most memorable triumph was in the long insult contest, in which she and the goblins traded barbs about the hygiene, deficient intellect, and bizarre sexual proclivities of each other's close family members, with judges scoring each contestant according to inscrutable and seemingly arbitrary criteria. Her strongest competition in this game was a small ferret-faced goblin who had proven to be adept at many of the previous games as well. Responding to his assertion that her father, quote, had cuckold's horns so elaborate they kept getting stuck in the roof beams, she called him a floppy, toothless fish licker, which probably gets a blank stare from most people, but which left the judges in stitches and is quite a bit funnier in the original High German. You'll just have to trust me on that. For this performance, the ferret-faced goblin presented her with his most treasured possession, a small silver-backed mirror that he could not even handle himself, but it kept wrapped in rags and soft moss to avoid it burning him. She unwrapped it carefully and saw her face in it, while the goblin looked admiringly on. From that day, it always seemed to be the two of them competing. Her eye for darts was unparalleled, but he was better at capturing butterflies, leashing them to strands of long grass until the forest floor fluttered in a carpet of colors. He swam better than she, like a creature born to water, but her long legs could outpace him on any road. Sometimes she won, and the goblin would do a silly dance for her. And sometimes he did, and she was compelled to balance a sleeping otter on her head, while the goblin giggled and crept through the grass to release the butterflies one by one. Then there came a day when he challenged her to a foot race, of the sort they had competed in a dozen times before. He said he had been practicing, and he set the stakes. If I win, he told her, you will marry me. This development was not entirely unexpected to her. I agree, she said, and if I win, you will marry me. Strangely, Schäfer doesn't actually tell us which of them won the race, but in any case, they were married a few days later with all the goblins, imps, fairies, and witches, and a few humans in attendance. Most of her family disapproved of this match. They didn't like the goblin's inappropriate jokes or his smell. They didn't like how the milk always curdled in its dish whenever he came to visit, or the way his weird mushroom-shaped penis would poke out from the leg of his short German shorts. Her mother and father were especially disappointed, at least at first, although the small children in the family found him friendly, and fat Aunt Gertrude thought he was hilarious, laughing uproariously in conversation with him and forever slapping him on his clammy, bony back. They had no children, and he outlived her by several centuries, such is the way of goblins. But Schaeffer tells us that he returned to the forest and hosted games in her honor every year on the date of their wedding anniversary and never married again. Losers in the games would be dunked briefly in the river, and winners would receive a garland of flowers that withered before the end of the celebration feast. It wasn't much, but I guess the contestants took it all in the spirit in which it was intended. Like the lady says, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. Thank you, and please enjoy the rest of the convention.
All right, keep it going for Pat Harrigan! And make a bunch of noise for all of our storytellers this morning. We had Philip Andrew Bennett Lowe, we had your host Allison Broren, and we had Pat. You can stick around for our next session that Pat Harrigan will be back again if you want to get some more Pat in your life, which I know you do. Thank you so much for visiting Wordslinger's Way. We hope this is the first of many visits you will have here during CONvergence. And have a great convention, everyone!